So in a previous video, I showed you inside the Zoom EXH-6, some interesting electronics going on there, and a few proprietary connections. But I briefly showed you as well the Zoom EXH-6, which gives you two XLR inputs and can slot on the Zoom F1 or any of the recorders that have got the appropriate connection. Now, one of the problems I had with it, as I mentioned in the previous videos, there's no locking XLR connection on here, and you can kind of just pull an XLR connection out. Makes me a bit wary when I'm recording. So I wanted to look inside here and just see if maybe if these could be modded to make them locking XLRs. So 6 screws that come out here. Once they're out, it's pretty straightforward to take this off. Again, really solid metal casing on these, which is nice. But when you look inside, this doesn't really look like any sort of bog standard XLR connection that I've seen. Now, if you're feeling brave or foolish, like I probably was, you can just pull this off. There we go. And what you find is you've got your XLR connection there, and this is soldered onto a board with a little connector which goes onto the main board here, and these just lift off. So, initial thoughts on whether you could attach a different XLR socket here which had locking. So first things first, I thought about perhaps just modding this, so somehow taking off this outer casing and attaching one which has the locking mechanism. The problem I think you will run into is that there tends to be a bit of a bump here when there's locking XLR, and there's not much room. You'd have to take out a little bit of the case, probably not a problem, but you've only got about a centimetre and a half until you hit this screw hole, which you can't really remove. And I don't know if that's enough length to get the bump that comes with the locking XLR connector. Potentially, if you were able to have it pulled out a little bit more, that might give you the room you need. You have to find a way. Second hurdle you're going to face is the rather proprietary nature of all the mics and connections that are in these Zoom modules. So if I think this is the one where I've previously had a little look at what's going on underneath here, but if you remove this tape or just peel it back a little bit, what you find underneath is this sort of copper casing which wraps around, and you can see that's actually sort of taped to this copper here. Now, I don't know if you can see all of the connections, the solders on this board, but there are, I can just about count them, I think 8, plus this one, which is the actual copper that's wrapped around, soldered onto here. Now, that tallies up with what we found in the little mic module, which you've got 4 wires coming from the left, 4 wires coming from the right, and also 8 solder points on the little 3.5mm ports. So again, these 8 connections, I don't know, maybe others do, of XLR sockets, female sockets like this, that have 8 pins coming out of them. I don't know what the 8 pins do or don't do, and how you would connect up a bog standard one if you were putting in, say, a new trick or something like that. So yeah, that all needs to connect onto this board. You need to connect 8 points, and it goes onto this slot and then slots back onto there. So some other people may have some better ideas of how I could mod this by either replacing the whole unit here and somehow working out how to work with these 8 different solder points that go onto this board, or perhaps a different way of using this but somehow hacking the sort of plastic connection here so that I get the locking inputs. Maybe it won't be worth it in the long run, but I like a challenge. So leave some comments, let me know what you think, and any possible solutions would be most welcome.